Good morning from Germany, where I am at the moment, and good afternoon to Australia, where most of other people are. I think we have a bit of a mix, 50-50 from people joining us from Europe, joining us from Australia. So wherever you are, good morning, good afternoon. My name is Bettina Shields. I'm the Health and Life Sciences Cluster Manager from the German-Australian Chamber of Industry and Commerce. For those who are not familiar with the German Chamber of Commerce, we are a member-based organization, basically not for profit, and we are the official representation of the German economy in Australia. So what we do is we promote bilateral trade, we advise companies on market developments, we support expansion of their business networks, and we also provide access to an extensive industry network here in Australia and also to Germany to some degree. We provide a lot of activities like today, for example, webinars, sort of like where we really share content and learning opportunities. We have networking events, which allow to connect with other members and other sort of stakeholders of the German-Australian industry. And we also have plenty of other activities for our members in Australia. We have 3 specialized industry clusters: energy, mining, and health and life sciences. Today, this webinar is an event organized by the Health and Life Sciences Cluster together with Jona Institute, which is a Health and Life Sciences Cluster member. And that allows us to sort of dive a little bit deeper into the important topics for the respective industry or field. Beyond sort of like what we do with our members here in Australia, we also have services that we provide to German companies who are interested in the Australian market through our customer success team. So for those who are joining us today from a German company who is in the medtech space and is interested in the Australian market, if there is any sort of information that you need in general about the Australian market, about market entry, market expansion, or other services, that's exactly what we're here for. So even beyond sort of the very specific topic that we're talking about today, more sort of in general, please feel free to reach out to myself and I'll be able to connect to the team as well. And this is just a short overview of all the services that we can provide for German or European companies and people who are interested in the Australian market. So much about us as the Chamber. Now today is about medical technology in Australia. So why is this so important, especially sort of for German and European companies? It's because there is a really strong commitment in the health and life sciences space in Australia, and there are high investments. And while there are a lot of efforts to build stronger sovereignty in R&D and manufacturing, still 95% of medical technology is imported to Australia, and a lot of that comes from Europe. So there's really a great opportunity for European companies in the Australian market because there is a high demand and great sort of opportunities that come from an aging society and like more demand for high-tech solutions. But as the import and everything isn't too easy in Australia through very stringent approval processes with the TGA, and they're also rather complex now with regard to the changes in the EU, we have partnered with our really great partner today, Jona Institute, with Sam McNamara, to give you a little bit of insight what you need to know if you want to take your medical devices from the EU into Australia, what impact has the EU and the changes, and how the TGA accommodates those changes that are happening in the EU. And yes, together with Jona Institute and the AHK Australia, there are a lot of strong partners here in Australia, and there's a broad network of people and companies who are very experienced already. So please feel free to use that network and connections that we have here in the country. And with that, I would love to present to you our speaker today, Sam McNamara, who's a regulatory clinical affairs consultant at the Jona Institute, New Zealand, but she is based in Australia, and we're going to talk about the Australian approval system today and the Australian regulatory environment, and not New Zealand. But I'm sure if you're interested in New Zealand as well, Sam and her team can definitely help there too. So Sam is specialized in clinical trial design for software as medical device products, incorporating AI and ML-driven technologies. and she has more than a decade commercial healthcare and clinical operations experience and draws her in-depth knowledge of regulatory requirements for pre-market clinical evaluation to deliver efficient multi-jurisdictional trials across Australia, the United States, and Europe, of course. So she's got extensive experience in regulatory agency and ethical review committee engagement, and has a really unique and highly valuable perspective for medical device manufacturers who look to navigate rigorous clinical trial approval processes, and also in general, like the whole approval processes for medical technology coming into other countries, getting through that stringent and strict approval process, especially now also mandated under the EU MDR. And with that, enough of myself. And I would happily hand over to Sam. And as I said, questions, if we can keep them to the end, that'd be great. Sam, stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Bettina, for the warm welcome and lovely intro. I have actually just got a small tech fail, despite our best efforts to be completely organised around technology. Bear with me, everyone.
Perfect.
That's okay.
Yes.
Excellent. Excellent. And one more piece. Apologies, everybody. And Bettina, is that still on the correct screen on your end?
No, you're on the presenter mode at the moment. Apologies, everyone. Zoom isn't super easy to handle with this, and
we had this working beautifully.
Yes, now you're on the right screen.
Hey, there we go. Excellent. So
perfect.
Onwards. Thank you, everyone, for your time this morning, this evening, joining us from all the corners of the globe. We've got colleagues from across APAC and Europe and Australia and New Zealand as well. So thank you for joining us, and thank you to the Health Cluster for the opportunity to discuss what is an incredibly hot topic, as it turns out. Just the amount of movement that we've had in the last week alone from the TGA has been quite incredible. The impact of the new regulations in Europe of MDR on the Australian medical device landscape is it's huge. It's important. It's important for Australian manufacturers. It's important for European-based manufacturers that are either have devices in Australia or wanting to bring devices into Australia, to understand, you know, where are we with the transition, and of course the great changes that have marked the history of MDR to this point. So today we're going to have we'll start with a quick recap, I guess, to just in case we have non-reg colleagues on the call. The European regulations have changed really substantially, and in so many ways for the greater good. But there's been implementation challenges. The MDR came into effect in 2021. And we've had rolling delays, and for various reasons, it's been difficult to get these what should be very good new regulations into effect and doing what they're designed to be doing. So, what's happened in the last few months is that MDR has been delayed again. And we've had another rolling out of deadlines all the way out to 2028 now is the final line in the sand, shall we say, for compliance for device manufacturers. So there's a lot happening across the globe. It's not just, I guess, centered on what's happening in Europe. It's the flow-on effect that's really what we're here to talk about today. So a couple of, I guess, highlights from the recent changes of MDR. The implementation timelines have been pushed out again, but there's also been a real drive to get the MDD certification extensions, I guess, better mapped out, a better plan and implement that. It's been quite nebulous with the shorter deadlines that we were looking at. So I think that's it's a huge benefit. We'll see how that's going to play out through the Australian market. So they've also removed the sell-off provision. There was a notion that devices that were coming to expiry of their manufacturing certificates had to be removed from the market within a particular time. So it was putting pressure on the manufacturers, on the healthcare systems that were concerned about losing supply. So 3 really good things have happened with the MDR, and for better or for worse, it's here and we need to love it. And I think there's some good that really can come. So there's opportunities at the moment for European supply, but what's happening in Australia? What's the opportunity over the ocean? So TGA, they've responded really well and lightning speed, actually. So TGA had a really robust MDR transition plan in place as it was. We were doing everything we could to be ready for the deadline that was going to be next year. Thankfully, it's been extended. But TGA has taken these last extensions that were released in March and done some really good things, actually. So what we're looking at for TGA's response to the most recent transition extensions, all the 3, I guess, pillars of their response so far remain unchanged: reduced fees, streamlined notification processes, doing what they can for digital notifications and so forth. But 2 really important things that were only updated on the 24th of July is the removal of the 12-month rather limit of supply of MDD certified stock that's in country, so it's technically supplied. There's certain conditions around that, but in essence, TGA has mirrored what's happened in Europe and removed that sell-off provision, which is fantastic. TGA's also now, I guess, confirmed that they will indeed be continuing to accept MDD certifications that have been extended in the EU. There was a time where that was not going to be the case, but at least now we have that concrete from TGA that MDD certifications that have been extended are back on the table. So our implementation timelines mirror very closely what's been proposed in Europe, only that we're doing each step 4 to 6 months or 12 months later, depending on the class of the device. So it's a good ripple effect, gives time for manufacturers and suppliers to do what they need to do as the changes come down from Europe. So all in all, it's an incredibly positive step that's happened in Australia. And it's TGA's most recent response is aligned with where they've always stood, really, with the whole MDR transition. For a medium-sized regulator, they're incredibly progressive, actually. They're very much focused on, well, we need to embrace this, we need to protect supply, we need to support our sponsors, we need to support manufacturers. The last thing that any of us want to see is supply shortages and patients not able to get the treatments, devices that they need. So with all of that, I guess, positivity and proactive action from the TGA, it's not without consequence. There's a lot that has to happen on the administrative side with regulatory actions. There's a host of activity, and we'll have a look at those today, what's actually happening in Australia and what manufacturers need to do. So just briefly, Australia is doing everything that they can wherever possible to align with the EU MDR, with the regulations themselves, and also the broader framework and the intent of the regulations. So there's a number of reforms, and it's all about keeping our regulations as close to what's happening in the EU as possible. And that's got some really important factors about for our EU-based manufacturers that are wanting to supply devices in Australia. What that alignment means is that it's actually Australia's should be a very familiar framework. That there's a lot that is quite comparable to the European framework. It's progressive, as I was mentioning before. TGA are quite forward-thinking. But one of the big pieces is that the majority of our medical devices are actually supported by European certifications. So there's a lot of drive, a lot of need for TGA to get this process right. But the importance of the European device manufacturing market to our healthcare system is incredibly important. I think it's something like over 90% of the devices in Australia are supported by European certifications. So it's important we get this one right. What's really good is that Australia is the only country that is accepting overseas regulator approvals or certifications in an effort to expedite approvals for devices that have already been assessed by what we're referring to as comparable overseas regulators. They're other regulators that the TGA says, yep, you've got this, and we can trust that your assessments are as good as we need them to be to protect our patients. So there's a handful, and we'll talk about who those countries are and how we might be able to leverage those certifications. So with that, I'm going to try to, there's so many examples. We could talk through so many different scenarios. I'm going to try to keep it to two main buckets of activities and considerations. The first being, if you're an EU-based manufacturer and you're exploring the possibility of bringing a device into Australia, then how does this go? What do you need to do in terms of placing your first product on the market? So we'll step through some of the fundamentals of that, some of the considerations that come from MDR itself, so that we can then move on to, well, for our EU manufacturers that have got devices in Australia already, got current ARTG listings, what do we need to do to keep those listings safe, to make sure that you can maintain compliance without having too much paperwork on your desk? There's ways and means. So they're the two main scenarios that we'll have a look at today. So let's start with a really top line recap of some of the core elements of the Australian regulations that will keep popping up through the rest of our discussions. So these are the core elements that you would want to have sat down, thought about, documented really thoroughly before wanting to make an application to TGA. Of course, medical device qualification and risk and device classifications. How do we describe devices in Australia? The essential principles. You'll see some alignment with the GSPRs in that respect. We'll have a quick chat about comparable overseas regulators, and Australia's quite unique two-step marketing authorization process. Just something that you need to be aware of the terminology, probably more so than anything else. It's not a really odd process. It's just very clearly delineated. So let's have a look at those core aspects of the regulations. In Australia, medical device qualification, what actually constitutes a medical device? As you can see, very closely aligned with the European definition. to diagnose, prevent, monitor, treat, so forth, to be used in the human body by physical, mechanical, or chemical action. You know, there's very, very distinct criteria. There's even a lovely decision tool if there's any discussion about whether you have a medical device or not. I have been there in those discussions, and I can tell you that sometimes this tool comes in really handy. So when we'll send out the slides too, so all of the links will be there for you. So first step, is it a medical device? Does it need to be registered in Australia? There's a heap of exemptions, particularly if you've got software, clinical decision support, that sort of thing. There's a lot of exemption provisions. So next piece, risk classification. We classify devices from class 1 being the lowest risk, all the way through to class 3 being the highest risk. And just like Europe, we've taken the middle band of class 2 and split that out into class 2A and 2B. So again, very familiar framework for our European colleagues. The next piece is kind of device. And you see this word coming up all the time. Has it changed the kind? Has such and such, what kind keeps coming up? So this is like type of device for us. And it's defined very, very specifically to carve out the highest risk devices into one bucket and carve out everything else into another bucket, and then group them according to factors like sponsor, manufacturer, the risk classification, but also the GMDN, which most of you will be familiar with, of course, because GMDN has been around and been the backbone. We now use moving to EMDN as well, but GMDN is what we use here in Australia. So in the highest risk class, the class 3 or active implantable medical devices, the kind is defined by its unique product identifier. So nothing fancy and exciting in there, but those are really the basics of how do we describe medical devices in Australia. So the essential principles. These are the legislative requirements for safety and performance characteristics. So they're very similar to the GSPRs and actually map really nicely from one to the other. In essence, there's three key pillars, and this is for the manufacturer is sort of obliged, required to design and develop the devices properly, apply state-of-the-art procedures, and ensure that the benefits outweigh the risks. And it's as simple as that. But it's quite a lengthy set of requirements, and it's something that you'll want to, if you're considering coming to Australia, and if you've got a device in Australia, actually, have a good look at the essential principles, and because they were updated only recently again, just to make sure that your devices are either still compliant with the principles, or what do you need to do to generate the evidence to show that your device does meet the requirements. They have to meet these essential principles for successful registration in Australia. So a good similarity again with Europe is that alignment between the essential principles and GSPRs. And what it means is that if you're doing MDR certification, you're already working on a GSPR checklist. It's a mapping exercise, and it's a mapping exercise across to the essential principles, plus maybe 5%. There's maybe 5 to 10% at most that is nuanced, not wildly different, just nuanced, mainly in the software section. So GSPRs and essential principles, the same, essentially the same. Agency programs that we have in Australia, this is an important one. It's that we're the only regulator, as I said, to be accepting overseas approvals or certifications, reports, and so forth. What that means is that we're very, very well positioned to get good devices onto the market very quickly. So by reducing the time that's required for TGA to go through the review process against the essential principles, we're reducing fees, getting devices to market a whole lot quicker, and giving you options if MDR is causing you headaches. So first piece, for our manufacturers that may be wanting to bring a device into the Australian market for the first time, let's have a step through how this process actually unfolds. So Australia, two-step market authorization or pre-market pathway. So we separate out conformity assessment procedures. We put into step one and call it pre-market assessment. We then pause very briefly, but we pause and then enter the market authorization, step two, and we refer to that as ARTG inclusion, which is the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods inclusion application. So let's have a look at the processes. Conformity, step one, is going to be really quite familiar to Europeans. It's not dissimilar to the sort of process you have to go through with submitting 510K and so on. Is your device manufactured in such a way that it should conform to the essential principles, and indeed does conform. So there's application, supporting data, fees, assessment, and an outcome, just like everywhere else. The thing is with TGA is that at the end of this process, you get a manufacturer's evidence ID, an MEID, and that is required to start your second step, your market authorization step. Until you have that ID, you can't progress. And there's reasons for that, but it is what it is. And it is quick. It's an incredibly quick process. Conformity can be at most 255 days. I can assure you it's not, but that's the statutory requirement. It's sitting around 140 days at the moment for a class 3 TGA doing the whole works, but we'll come and have a look at what happens if you've got certifications already. Step two, we have application and assessment. Do we need to audit your assessment? Does TGA get a bit of a bad feeling that something might be amiss? They might want to audit. And then, of course, there's some of the higher risk devices have to go to audit. So let's have a better look at conformity. The scope of our conformity assessments, like everywhere, really is dependent on the risk classification, device complexity, all of those design and construction type considerations. But also in Australia, whether a full conformity assessment is required or whether we can do an abridged assessment. And that's where this having overseas approvals really comes into its own. What we're going to do, though, is walk through the process of, well, if TGA was doing the whole process, what does it look like? So there's the supporting data form. And that's where you nominate your conformity procedures and send your documentation in, and that's the big administrative step. But it's all about making sure that you're submitting the evidence that means that TGA can assess that you have actually met with our conformity assessment procedures, our requirements in the regulations, which are split into parts 1 through to 5 in each of these buckets. So we're not going to delve into exactly what's in each conformity assessment procedure, interest of time, and if anyone's that excited about it, I'm happy to talk to it. But just note there's six categories of requirements, and you have to pick and choose which 2 or 3 suit your device. So it's very, very much tailored to the type of device you've got. There's clocks like everywhere. You've got 20 sponsors have 20 days to respond with things. TGA has 20 days to do their homework and then come back to you with notifications. So conformity can cost anywhere, if TGA is doing the whole thing, anywhere between 30,000 and 95,000 Aussie dollars. So what I can say up front is that if we're looking at abridgment, if we're looking at, you've got EU certifications or MDSAP, something like that, then that comes down a lot. So this is the worst case scenario to have a look at how does this process unfold. So once we've been through the conformity assessments, does our device meet the Australian requirements? Then we say, yes, we've got your manufacturer's ID, manufacturer's evidence ID, and you can proceed to the next step, which is the market authorization step, or ARTG inclusion application. So preliminary assessment, you pay your application, you do your application, pay the fee, do all of the admin stuff. TGA has a look at your application. Have you included the things that need to be there? Basics, manufacturer's evidence certificates, declarations. There's a little list. Have you put all the things in that you should? Once you pass that, then the question is asked, do we need to audit your application? How good do we feel about the documents we've received? Or is the device a type that has to be through to audit because it's high risk? So once we go through the audit process, we get a decision to either include, hopefully, usually, the device, or a request for information, or a rejection. It's actually the statistics from the FY22 that's been released. It's very rare to get an outright rejection. The TGA is very much more about working with you to try to get devices on the market that are safe and are going to do a good job for patients. So they're very open to working through that with you. I'm not going to delve into this terribly much, but this is for background information for you if you'd like to have a look through the presentation later. The TGA takes a risk-based approach to what documentation they ask you for when they're asking you to submit documents. So this is simply to show that it's very clear the higher risk devices need both a quality system assessment and a product specific assessment that in Europe is also referred to as type or design examination. It's essentially the same requirements. So using EU certifications to abridge this process, to make it shorter, if we're looking at either MDD or MDR certifications, there's a host of different annex reports that can be used to fulfill the various TGA requirements for conformity for the quality system, but also for the product itself, for its own evidence. So rest assured, it's very well mapped out. If you've got EU certifications, it's a drop this certificate in here, drop that certificate in there type of process, which is fantastic. It really speeds things up for good devices. So all of that is specified in great detail in a wonderful guidance document that I've got the link to in the presentation, the use of market authorization evidence. It's got a big, comprehensive, detailed table that won't go on a PowerPoint slide. So I've done what I can to just put things into buckets so that the main trend I'd like you to take away here is that conformity assessment with comparable overseas regulator approvals. For step one, send the reports. Don't put the certificates in, send the reports, because that's what's got the detail to help TGA assess against each of the requirements. That's one of the reasons that applications are getting sent back to say, put the certificate in, we need the report, and so on. So in step two, this is where you put your certificates in, because we've been through this conformity process more with the reports. We know the device a lot better. So send us the certificates and summaries for if you're looking at US approvals. or your MDSAP certificate rather than the report. But that's really the main division between the two steps and the types of documents that we want to be using from EU certifications. So the application audit process, I won't go through this in its entirety. It's there for your background, but the main things to take out are the opportunities to for EU certified devices or MDR certified devices to not be subject to the same rigorous mandatory application audits. So, for example, a class 3 device would ordinarily be going down through the algorithm. It's regulation 5.3 says class 3 devices, mandatory audit, no discussion. But that was amended, that if the class 3 device has MDR certification, you're excused. You don't have to go through mandatory application audit. And with it being a class 3 device, you'd probably get a level 2 audit and so on. But they've taken that away, and that's in recognition of the enhanced standards that MDR is bringing in the regulations. So TGA's got more confident with accepting them, and the statistics would echo that they are doing it. They're not just talking about it. So there are some triggers in here. What are the questions that TGA look at so that you can say, well, if where the star is, for instance, if I've got all the way through and I've managed to not go through to mandatory audit, and then there's a chance that I might be selected for a chance audit, a discretionary audit. Submit good documents. If you submit good documents and you tell a good story and you're transparent, it gives TGA confidence, and you're less likely to go back into the funnel of mandatory audit. So takeaways there: submit good documents, tell a good story, and leverage your MDR certification when it comes through, because there's benefits. So the application audits themselves, if you can avoid them, fantastic. There's ways and means to do that. If you have to go through to a level 2 audit, there's a lot of documents that are requested, but it's nothing you shouldn't have. I guess it's not. You shouldn't have to go and make a clinical evaluation report for a class 3 device because you'll have been through MDR, or you've been developing your device in accordance with its risk classification, so you've got a CER for it. So the level 2 is not as bad as actually some of the other audit processes that you can have in other jurisdictions. So the MDR certification to this point means we have got excused from mandatory application audits. We've lowered the likelihood of getting selected for a discretionary audit because TGA trusts in the quality of the MDR certification, and we're reducing fees. If we're reducing assessment time, we're reducing fees. So again, just recap, 2-step process. Conformity is step 1. Step 2 is about the market authorization, the final step, more product-centric rather than manufacturing facility-centric or quality system-centric. So, excuse me, if you've got the MDR certification, use it. There's benefits. We've talked about the application audits, abridged assessments. With that said, if MDR certification is a way off or it's unpredictable, you've got business needs, you need to have a plan that is going to get you through with maybe an 18-month delay. Australia does accept a host of other certifications as well, from the US, from Singapore, from Canada. So there's a lot of options that you've got. And now that MDD is back on the table, there's a whole lot more options, and it's only a good thing for all of us. I think we've probably covered all of those pieces. That's there as a roundup for you. this is what's happened in Australia, this is how we're dealing with it, and the overview of the process again. So for our manufacturers that are wanting to maybe come to Australia for the first time, it might be daunting if you're looking at the regulations that are not terribly user-friendly, let's be honest. They're not terribly well written from a readability perspective. It looks more daunting than it is, to be honest. TGA's got very efficient processes, and they're really good to work with. They want you to succeed. They want good devices here too. So it's a good process. And as Bettina said, we're here to help. If there's anything that we can do to support that, we'd love to see your devices, you guys and the devices on shore. So if we have already made that step, we've got devices in Australia, we need to have a look at how we're going to maintain our existing ARTG entries with all of the changes, advances that are coming with MDR. So I guess that the impacts, who isn't impacted? Let's take that cohort out. If you've got your ARTG listing or entry supported by MDSAP for the quality system piece, and then marketing authorizations from US, Japan, Canada, Singapore, then you're not impacted, of course, with all of the changes. If you've got TGA issued conformity assessment certificates, if TGA's done the conformity assessment, then it's no problem. What's happening with MDR will happen around you. If you've got MDD certification for a class 1 device that's non-sterile, non-measuring, it's a really simple class 1, and you didn't end up with a classification change as a result of your MDR certification, you're not affected. If you're staying as a class 1, non-sterile, non-measuring, it's still self-certification. So those are the I guess, types of entries that you don't need to be concerned with. Some of our European manufacturers do have MDSAP as well. They also have approvals in the US, maybe PMA. And so you can use those if MDR is causing you headaches. Do have a look at how those extra approvals can help. The group that I'd like to focus on for the last few minutes is the first subgroup is those that have actually got their MDR certification. What's happened as a result of that certification? There'll either be no change to the device, everything's really comparable in terms of the class, the intended use, the kind, the type of device. Nothing changed as a result of the MDR process. We then have a group that have some changes, some low risk, not likely to impact patient outcomes type changes. So we have a specific process or set of processes for managing those entries. Then we have those that have had substantial changes. We might be talking about a reclassification of the device, an up-classification that's happened during your MDR certification process. What happens then? What happens if you're a lower risk class still in Australia than you are under MDR, which shouldn't happen all that often because of the reforms, but there's the odd case that it's going to happen. So to be aware that maybe we need to have a look at how do you manage those things. The last MDR certification challenge that can happen is all of a sudden you find that you're out of compliance with the essential principles for some reason, whether it's a labeling change between your MDR certified device and your MDD certified device or your legacy device. How can we manage supplying those devices that are technically out of compliance and can't be supplied? there's ways and means. TGAs has put processes in place. The other group, MDD certifications. We've got the group of devices that manufacturers have been able to qualify for extended validity of the MDD certification. TGAs considering those as in force, even if they've got, if their expiry date has lapsed, TGAs made that concession to say, well, is what it is. We're all copping delays. So that's a very big and positive change that's happened recently. The other group is the MDD certification entries that the MDD cert is expiring, and maybe the extension requirements haven't been met in the EU. Maybe there's been a decision not to go to MDR. There's a handful of those situations as well. So you'll need to look at a lapse in conformity assessment notification. So they're the main, I guess, outcomes of the MDR impact in Australia on those EU certified devices. There's a host of regulatory actions as they're being referred to. All that is TGA has put together a grouping of forms and applications and notifications and web services, like a support hub for the MDR transition, which is great because a lot of these forms and processes are in place, have been in place for ages, works well, but they've tailored then interim measures to help manufacturers to keep their devices on the market in Australia, and made some quite robust concessions in comparison to how how they've been viewed, I guess, historically. Bettina even spoke to the stringent processes, and TGA is stringent. They expect quality, they expect safety, but they have been incredibly reasonable through this whole process. So you'll find that there's discussions to be had if you find yourself in a non-compliant situation. They encourage you to be in touch and work through it, all the way through to make it devices that are under MDD certification don't need to come straight off the market as soon as the certificate's expired, for instance. And so there's TGA's got a provision that, yeah, okay, you can continue to supply the device for a period of time, but you just have to notify us of what's happening. So they're working with us. One of the support hub pieces that TGA has put in place, if the device, because of MDR certification and only because of that, has had what they're referring to as low risk sorts of changes, maybe the indications in the IFU are slightly different. Maybe there's a slightly different patient cohort, maybe there's a carve out under the MDR certification. These sorts of changes, TGA feels in the situation we're in, manufacturers and sponsors can deal with that best by putting notifications out to the public, out to users, out to healthcare professionals via the TGA website, actually, and this online web service. So to use it, all it boils down to be eligible is the change has to be legitimately because of MDR certification, not because the device was faulty or unsafe in any other way. So they're just asking for transparency. Please only use this if you to avoid a recall, that it's for MDR transition purposes, and that all of the other requirements, like being manufactured under a valid conformity assessment certificate, all of those basics are covered. So there's some streamlined notification processes, some ways to not have to go into recall mode to manage all of these oddities that happen around MDR certification. So Bettina, I don't think we've got time to really delve into these. If we get into it, we're going to go down a rabbit hole because there's forms and considerations. I'll just put it out there that the content's here for our attendees. If you have questions and you'd like to get more information or understand more about the considerations around the process and engaging with TGA, very happy to talk to you and work through that with you. So again, this one's related previously. These are the forms and the sorts of changes that trigger different actions, these regulatory actions that are really just things we do anyway, but they're a bit tailored towards dealing with MDR. So that's there's an algorithm to help see what do I need to action, what forms do I need to submit. Reclassification, it's just something that deserves a special mention. There was a deadline in Australia when we were aligning our reclassification reforms with Europe. The device types that are affected are almost exactly the same as what's happened in Europe. So what's happened and why is probably familiar to you anyway. What I just wanted to raise is for our manufacturers that have got manufacturers and sponsors who have got devices in Australia at the moment, just do be sure that you've either made that notification to TGA that, hey, we've got a device that's probably impacted, probably is the key word, probably impacted by the reclassifications. Else you may need to look at alternative ways to supply the device, of which you have to look at exemptions around unapproved devices. It's not impossible, it's just something that, you know, some of our manufacturers have been a bit caught out by it. So it's just something to be aware of. Do have a good look at whether you needed to notify the TGA about your potential reclassification. If you hadn't, then plans in place to be looking at unapproved goods supply, which is actually a very straightforward process in Australia. Just got to fill in the form. So MDD certifications that are lapsing, I alluded to it before. If they've lapsed, then you've got a period of time, 12 months, up to 12 months to continue supply, and then work out, is that a matter of cancel your ARTG listing or remove the device from the market. TGA's really bending over backwards to help in these situations. So they are considering compliance matters on a case-by-case basis. And if you've taken reasonable steps to maintain your certifications, then they're more than happy to help. So again, very, very human, very reasonable. So some, I guess, hot tips for maintaining your ARTG entries. One piece of manufacturer's evidence per ARTG entry is something that's surprising people. So just pick the most pertinent certificate from either MDR or MDD, if that's what you're doing to update your device, and append that. You just keep all of the other stuff, all of the other certificates on file, and TGA is very happy with that. So just one, just the most pertinent. There's actually no legislated reason that you have to update your manufacturer's manufacturer evidence in the TGA portal. So for instance, if you get your MDR certification through next week, you can choose whenever you like to actually update your ARTG entry with that new certification. So don't feel pressured by it. Do it when it's right for the company, and you can separate out the entries versus the MDR certificate or the MDD certificate. That's no problem at all. There's no, I just wanted to say that if it is a case that there's devices in Australia that were under MDD and it turns out that the certificate had lapsed and they weren't covered at manufacture, at time of manufacture by a valid certificate, that is a bit of a drama. There's no provision for those sorts of devices or those situations, but there are other schemes like the special access scheme, just one of the ways to supply unapproved or non-compliant goods. So again, very flexible, lots of avenues. TGA is very happy to work with you. So MDSAP certifications, of course, other regulators look at options. You've got options in Australia, so leverage them to help through this really turbulent time that we're all facing. A lot of changes, but it's never dull, shall we say. So that is the impact of EU MDR on the Australian medical device regulatory landscape. It's profound. It is nothing short of profound. So there's what's good for all of the changes and potential chaos. Some people feel like it's chaos. Is that TGA is moving really fast to adapt, and so we're getting reforms through. We're getting great updates. We're getting better processes. It's kind of the kick in the right direction that maybe we needed to have. So it's a great market. It's a fruitful market, and I hope that this morning's presentation has been helpful for you. And please don't hesitate to be in touch if you've got questions.
Thank you very much, Sam, for that. There's definitely a lot to unpack between all the regulatory topics. So I'm aware that we have expired our time, but myself, I'm happy to stay on a few more minutes. If anyone has a question, I'll pop it in the chat, or I think you can raise your hand and then I can unmute you. So if there are any questions, feel free to. We still can have like another 5 minutes or so to answer a few questions. Otherwise, I will be in touch. Sam will kindly provide the presentation for everyone. So I will reach out to everyone to share the presentation and also the recording once it's available. And then if you have any questions, if you would like to have a bit more of an in-depth conversation with Sam about your specific topic, that's exactly what she's here for. So feel free to use that. And yes, any questions? Last chance. I'll just quickly check the Q&A, but I don't think that, no, that nothing came in there. No questions in the chat. Well, then I think everyone is happy. I was very comprehensive, so maybe all questions were answered. So then I suggest we leave it at this, only 2 minutes over, so that's good. And thank you very much, Sam, for your presentation. Thank you everyone for joining this morning or afternoon, depending on where you joined in from. And any questions, reach out either to myself or Sam. We're happy to assist. And I wish all of you good rest of the day, however long it may be.